Hi, I'm Jane Stafford. I have been a Louet dealer for over 35 years, and one of the questions that I commonly get asked is, what's the difference between the Spring and the David loom? Both of these looms have had recent upgrades in the last 2 years. So we have the David 3 and the Spring 2 right here. And what I thought I'd start with was all of the things that are the same on both of these looms, because there are many things that are the same. And then after we do that, we'll look at what the major differences are. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is that the dimension of the wood used in both looms is exactly the same. They are sturdy, tough, heavy looms, and you can weave anything on them, absolutely anything. They both come with a built-in rattle on the top. These are rattle covers that just slide on after you spread your warp out in the rattle. So with these looms, we warp over the top, spread everything out in this beautiful little rattle, and once it's all spread out, you take your little rattle cover and just slide it on. So, same, beam size, same. They both come with a little lid. The lids pop out, and we'll have a look inside in a little bit to see what's in there. On both looms, they just pop out. So it's nice to be able to put things on top. So moving down the loom, let's look at the beater next. Both looms have the same beater. It's a floor slung beater on both looms now, and it's an awesome beater because it has a handle in the middle. And having a handle in the middle of your beater requires you to beat from center, so you're always bringing the beater against the fell of the cloth perfectly even. Now, at the bottom of both of these beaters, way down here, they sit on tiny little feet. Those feet are adjustable. You can raise them up or lower them down, which means that you have the ability to adjust your beater so perfectly so that it supports your shed when it supports the lower layer of your warp when the shed is open. So what else is the same? They both use Texsolve heddles. All Louet looms use Texsolve heddles. They both have the same cloth advancing system. They have a nice big handle, which is on the outside of the loom. You just lift this up, and that releases the tension on the friction brake. And then we advance our warp by pulling forward on this. So that's the same on both looms, and they both have the same heavy-duty ratchet and pawl system. It's a double ratchet and pawl system with a back pawl and a front pawl going into the ratchet. I always have to think about those words. Which part is the pawl and which part is the ratchet? What else is the same on them? The treadles are the same on them. The handle for advancing the warp is the same on them. The back beam and the front beam are the same on them. So many things are identical now. At one time they were very different. The David originally was a much smaller loom, but now everything is pretty much the same. I'm just looking at my list of things. I've done it all, I think, of the sames. Yeah, beam size, built-in rattle, shelf, Texsolve heddles, brake system, ratchet and pawl system, handle on the beater, floor slung beater, ability to adjust the height of the beater. Check, we've done it. So now what we're going to look at are the major things that are different. And there's some big differences, even though they might look the same. The Spring is a parallel countermarch loom. Very, very different system of moving your shafts up and down. The David is a sinking shed loom. All the warp threads sit at the top, and when you step on a treadle, they drop down to the floor. So I think what I'll do is I'll just draw your attention to where the warp sits on both of these looms. The warp on the David sits up high, and then when you step on a treadle and depress, the harnesses or the shafts that are tied up to that treadle move down until they sit on the shuttle race down here. And remember, you can adjust that. Now I've got a floating selvage in the middle, so I'll just lift that up so you can see inside that shed. And I will weave on both of these looms so that you can see the differences in the action. But the action is really smooth and easy. So I think what we should do next is have a look inside the castles of these looms. All right? So we'll look at the system that moves the shafts and allows them to lower. The David loom is a sinking shed loom. I'm going to go around to the back and show you how this loom works. We'll take the lid off, we'll take its little hat off and look inside and see what is the mechanism that makes the shafts move. And then later on, we're going to go underneath the loom and I'll show you the tie-up system. Because how the shafts are activated on this loom and how the treadles are tied up are the major differences between the David and the spring. So let's look at the David first, and I'm going to just pop around here and pop off his hat. And at this point, I have the blocking pin in. The blocking pin is a pin that makes all the shafts exactly the same height, and that's really handy when you're threading to have everything blocked and locked. So you put your blocking pin in when you're doing your tie-up and when you're doing your threading. Now, to take the blocking pin out, we're going to just pull it. So it goes in from the back, and I'll take it out, and when I take it out, things are going to start moving. Here they go. I'm going to put my hand on. I'm depressing all of the shafts with my hand, just so that you can see this movement in here. Isn't that cool? Look at that. Now, right now, there are no threads. There's no warp on the back 4 shafts. There's only warp on the front 4 shafts. So that's why this looks different in here. And that's completely normal when you're just working with 4 shafts. You just let the back 4 pop up, they'll be a little higher, and everything is fine. When you want to put that blocking pin in, this is what happens. You insert it at the back, the pin goes in the hole, and then you depress the 8th shaft, and look at what's happening in there. There's a little nook right in there. And then you go get the next one, push your pin in, go get the next one, push your pin in, in. And then to get this in the back hole, you just press on the whole pin and secure it in there like that. So that's what it looks like inside. I'm going to pull it out. And now we're going to have a look at what happens when you step on a treadle. And I'm lucky because I don't even have to go around to the front of the loom to depress a treadle. I can do it from the back. So my foot is depressing a treadle, and look what happens. These little cams start to twist and move. And as they twist and move, the springs open until it's in its full open position. And the way these cams are cut allows the weaver to enjoy the least amount of pressure necessary to hold the shed open, which is the exact opposite than what you would find on a rising shed loom, where you have to step on a treadle, lift all the harnesses up, and you need the most effort to sustain that shed opening. Well, on this loom, because you're pulling down, you're working with gravity, and you're working with these brilliant little cams that flatten out at a certain point, it takes the least amount of effort to hold the shed open when you're manipulating this. You take your foot off the treadle, the springs retract, and boing, everything returns to its up position. And you get an awesome shed. You get a shed where the tension on what's up and what's down is the same, because the warp threads are all high up in their up position. Then you start depressing the treadle. Those original threads, the warp that's not moving stays up in its up position. Those that are moving move down through the center of the reed and down to the bottom. Let's have a look at that at the front of the loom. So here I am depressing a treadle. Before I do that, we can see that the warp is all up high. And now as I start to depress, half the warp, whatever's tied up, starts to move down. There it is, kind of through the center of our reed, and then all the way down to the bottom. The treadle is fully depressed. When it's fully depressed, the warp is sitting on the shuttle race, which is where you want it. It supports it so you don't get any skips and jumps. And you will notice that when the shed is open, because all the warp started up high, what started to move down to the bottom, we have the same angle on what's up and what's down. And that is, in essence, what you get on a counterbalance loom or a countermarch loom. Both parts of the warp have equal angle on them when the shed is open. So that's really nice. It helps the weft thread hit the fell of the cloth perfectly balanced. So that is the brilliance of this loom. Now, the other major difference are the treadles. So we're going to go down on the floor and I'm going to show you how to tie it up. So here I am sitting on the floor looking at all of my treadles. The David comes standard with 8 shafts and 10 treadles. These are the lambs. The lambs just depress. When you step on that, it pulls on this Texoff cord, which pulls the shaft down, which opens the spring. Everything's connected here. We can adjust the height of our lambs with these little mechanism right here. But the most important thing to note is that there is a tie-up cord for every one of these positions. Now, Texoff cord has a hole every centimeter, a nice hole that opens up. When we go to attach whatever we want to tie up to a treadle, we need to use the last hole on the cord that's our first solid hole. This hole here is not going to be solid because this is where the Texoff was cut and burnt to melt the plastic. So we want to use the first solid hole. So I'll go over here so that you can see it the best. Right now I have a tie-up cord on shaft 1 or lamb 1 and a tie-up cord on lamb 3, which is right there. There is a groove cut into the treadle and it makes it extremely easy to slide the Texoff cord on. So it's hard to get a good shot of this without my hand being in the way, but I'll try and do it with it out of the shot. So there, popping it on and off is really easy. I'm going to depress lamb 3, lift the treadle up a little bit, grab my Texoff and pop it off. So now to put it back on, I'm going to depress lamb 1, lift my treadle up with my right hand, find that first secure solid hole, and you just slide it on. It's as simple as that. Get my number 3, find my first secure hole, press down on lamb 3, and there is my first secure hole. And presto mundo, you've got it tied up. It couldn't be simpler to tie up. You don't have to use or move tie-up cords anywhere. You just use what you want or what you need for your tie-up. But there's one in every position. Mine sometimes aren't very tidy looking because I push them around. Anyway, that's it. You couldn't get a simpler tie-up system on a loom, I don't think. And now I'm going to get myself off the floor and show you how this weaves. So here we go, weaving away on our wee David. You'll notice that when you step on a treadle, even some of the warp shifts down a little bit, but that's not a problem. We still have a big, beautiful, lovely shed. There's no wondering where it is. We have a nice long weaving distance. And one thing I want you to just notice is how quiet this loom is. You know, all the Texoff heddles are light and easy to move. The beater moves easily, and it's a quiet loom. I'm just weaving plain weave. If you take your foot off the treadle too quickly, it snaps up and it hits the bottom, like there. I'm going to snap it off. That is your foot leaving the treadle quickly, and it hits the back of the frame of the loom at the back. But when I'm weaving, let me get the right shed. I keep my heels on the treadle board and just gently move my foot from treadle to treadle to treadle. Now I'll go into my twill treadles. These might have a little more ping to them, but it's not a lot. So that's about as noisy as it gets. Much quieter than many looms that have metal heddles and shafts that fall. So there you go, kids. That's me weaving on a David 3. Easy peasy. So the things that we saw on this loom that are so awesome are how the shafts move up and down, how easy it is to tie up the treadles, how quiet it is to weave on. So many of the other elements of this loom are the same as the spring, and we're going to go to the spring next and check it out, and we'll see the major differences between the two. Okay, let's talk about the spring. The spring is a parallel countermarch loom. Very, very different operating mechanism than we saw on the David. A countermarch loom is a loom that has two sets of lambs. The upper lambs, whatever's tied up to the upper lambs, will make those shafts sink. Whatever's tied up to the lower lambs will make those shafts rise. And so on a parallel countermarch loom, you have two sets of lambs, and they are doing this. They are moving in a parallel motion to each other. That's super cool. It means that when we go to tie up our treadles, we have long cords that are tied up to the upper lamb and short cords that are tied up to the lower lambs. Those cords are all the same length because these lambs move parallel to each other when the loom is in action. This system makes for the easiest possible treadling I think there ever could be on a loom. It is so easy to treadle the spring loom. So let's have a look. I'm going to pop his hat off. I just stuck my hand underneath, and we're going to have a look inside, and you'll see it's a completely different looking beast inside. The spring loom comes standard with 8 shafts on it, but there is at the very front extra rollers to allow you to expand this loom to 12 shafts. So that's another thing that makes it very different than the David. The David is 8 shafts, and that's what it is. This comes as 8, but it can become a 12 with 14 treadles. So if you get shaft envy, this might be a reason to choose this loom. Or if you think you're going to want more shafts in the future, that would be a reason why you'd choose the spring over the David. What we see right here is the blocking pin in, and I'm going to talk a lot about it. I put the pin in from the back, and when this loom comes from the factory, all of its innards are perfectly set, and so you don't ever want to mess around with it, really. The pickup place for the blocking pin has all been marked with black marker, so you know exactly where to insert this once it comes out. So I'm going to start pulling it out, and you just pull these off, and the shafts are starting to sink. I have no threads on the back 4. It's a 4-shaft warp, so if I pull these off, everything's going to go down to the bottom. All those back shafts have sunk to the bottom. Don't worry about it. If you're weaving just on the front 4, you leave the back 4 pinned. So I'm going to pick them up again, slide that on, pull this over here. I'm going to show you in a drawing how this loom works. But it's handy to see that we can move this circle back and forth, and this is the action that's creating our shed. But I want to keep the back 4 blocked because I'm not using them. All right? I'm going to slide that pin all the way through to the front and in the hole. And if we were looking here, you can see that the front 4 are lower. And I'm going to talk to you about that. When you pull the blocking pin in, sometimes they sink and people get all upset and worried. You don't need to worry about that. I'll explain in a minute. So I'm going to leave everything as it is right now. I'm going to go around to the front of the loom, and I'm going to do a drawing of what's happening inside this castle. It'll help you understand how the loom works. All right, now I'm going to show you how this little baby works. Now, every shaft and its upper lamb and its lower lamb has its own individual cord. So if you have an 8-shaft spring, you have 8 runs of cords, and they all run on their own separate rollers, and those rollers move beautifully because there's stainless steel ball bearings inside those black rollers. It makes this loom move so easily. So, but this is how it gets put together in the factory. So inside the frame of the loom, we have all of these rollers. So up in this corner, there's an outside roller and an inside roller. And this is totally out of proportion, but it's okay. You'll understand it. And then down at the bottom, and it's these rollers that the cord gets strung over. So Texsolve comes in just a big long length, and they cut the appropriate length, and they start here. So here's our starting point. And that cord goes over this roller. Then it goes down to the bottom and up to this roller and over this roller. And then it crisscrosses and goes here and down and up. It comes back and it gets joined to where it started with this little Texsolve peg. And they stagger those in the factory so that on one shaft, the little peg is here, on the next shaft, it's over on the other side, and it staggers all the way along so that they're not all in the same place and they don't all bind on each other, because that would cause problems. Anyway, so here we have our circle, that thing that moves. Then what happens is the upper shaft bar goes into the outside of the circle. It plugs in with these cool little doodads that plug into the Texsolve cord on the outside. Then the bottom of the harness bar gets plugged into the outside of that Texsolve circle. And then here are all your little heddles. You can tell I went to art school. All your little heddles on your shaft. Then we have a space, and we have the upper lamb. And the upper lamb is plugged into the outside of the circle. But the lower lamb is plugged into the inside of the circle. So they're different lengths. And those lambs all have little notches in them that allow you to attach your tie-up cords, which of course are made out of Texsolve as well. So if I want 1 and 3 to rise, for instance, I'm using a rising shed pattern, and I want harness 1 or shaft 1 and 3 to go up. I'm going to tie a lower cord to 1, and it will attach to my treadles down here below. Actually, I'm going to show you the treadles underneath. I'll do a tie-up for you, so it makes way more sense than looking at my measly little drawing. But what I do want you to see is what happens to anything that's tied to it. So if I have a tie-up cord here, and it's attached to this treadle, and this treadle depresses, I step on that treadle and it goes down. What happens is that cord starts moving this. This is going to come down, and this moves like so. And because this is attached to the same circle, it goes up. And this comes down. And they both move the same distance to the center point, and they move together like this. And that's what activates this entire loom. Super cool. All right? So I just wanted to give you this little drawing so that you can understand or make some sense of what's inside the castle, because if you've never seen a parallel countermarche loom before, it's pretty daunting when you look in there. But if you can sort of understand what's happening by looking at my puny little drawing here, it might help you just grasp the concept. So that's it. That's all I'm going to tell you about the inside of your castle and how everything works. Then I'm going to go down to the floor and we're going to look at the tie-up. Okay? Well, I've made it onto the floor again. So here's what it looks like underneath your little spring. It's so beautiful. Here are the upper lambs. We got a good view of the upper lambs. We got a good view of the lower lambs. We've got a good view of all the little grooves that are cut out that the Texsolve tie-up cords just sit in so that they're not all over the place. And here's a close-up of the tie-up cords. So when you get the loom, you get a big bundle of short cords, and they're all cut exactly the same length, and their little ends have been melted on the nylon. This isn't plastic, this is nylon. It's got a hole every centimeter, like so. So we've got short cords that are for the lower lambs. Makes sense that they're for the lower lambs. And we've got long cords for the upper lambs. And just a quick review, our upper lambs will sink, will bring anything down, and our lower lambs will rise. And how I remember that is that our upper lambs can't go up because they're already at the ceiling, so they can only come down, and our lower lambs are sitting on the floor, and the only place they can go is up. So they're your risers, and your uppers are your sinkers. So that's handy to know. So look at my tie-up here. I'm one of those old weavers that learned how to do everything on counterbalance looms, because that was my first loom, and I still sort of think about all my tie-ups in counterbalance world in a counterbalance way. So I have 1 and 3 tied up and 2 and 4 tied up to these 2 treadles here. So let's dissect that. I have an upper lamb on an upper lamb. I have a tie-up cord on my upper lamb on number 1. It attaches and comes down to a screw. And there's my upper on 3. So there's my 1 and my 3. And because I want those to come down, I have to tell the loom that 2 and 4 are going to rise. If you want to do it the other way, do it the other way. It's not right or wrong. You're going to get exactly the same shed. So they come down, the cords coming from the upper lambs come in front of the lower lambs, and then they attach to the screw, and that system is just as easy on this as was on the David. So you just put that little screw there and push it on with your thumb, boom, it's done. Attaching them is really easy. You just pull out your lamb, and you can pull on these. You're not going to hurt anything by doing that. When I'm trying to count them, I like my loom to look clean, and I don't want anything on here. Some people number them so that they don't have to do that, but I just go 1, 2, 3. Okay, I want it on 3. So I do that. I pull out. I find my hole, the first really secure hole, not the one that got cut. Boink. And it's ready to attach. And I would attach this to the screw on 3. You do all of your tie-ups only with the blocking pin in, because the blocking pin puts everything in neutral. If you do it with the blocking pin out, this is going to look like a total mess. So when you do your tie-up, remember, always have your blocking pin in it, and you'll see how beautiful this looks and how orderly it looks. It only looks orderly when the blocking pin is in. When we pull that blocking pin out, something is going to happen. And I'm going to show you right now. Here we have the blocking pin out on the back, on the front 4, because that's all I'm weaving. When I do this, look at, they wiggle around. And often, because of the weight, and especially on the wider springs, because of the weight of all of these sticks, the sticks, all of these lambs and the harness bars, shaft bars, they just pull everything down into the bottom position. But it's still working like a counter marche loom. Everything just sort of drops. Another thing that happens is sometimes when you treadle, the treadle doesn't completely come back up, and that's okay too. It's working, it happens here, but I have other springs where they don't just pop back. Anyway, it's okay for it to look like this. It's okay if your shafts drop when you pull the blocking pin. We're going to go up and look at that shed in a minute. But it's super easy to treadle these. And when the treadle is fully depressed, the cords on the treadle that is depressed straighten out, just like it was when the blocking pin was in. So super easy, you know. I can treadle this with a finger. Takes no effort to move this at all. One last thing, because I'm sitting on the floor here, I want to draw your attention to my toe. My toe over there is tugging on a cord. What are these cords? What the heck is this cord all about? This cord is attached to springs on the back side of the loom. And that cord comes along here and attaches to our floating breast beam. And our floating breast beam gives us this added extra feature that allows us to have the same tension on the warp when the shed is open or closed. It never changes because the floating breast beam rocks ever so slightly. And I'm going to show you all of that up top. But it made sense to have a peek at these cords while I was down here. Okay, so let's go up. Here we are up top, and we can really have a good look at what's happening with that floating breast beam that I was talking about down below. So on most looms, well, on all other looms, we have our warp. So I'm going to just pretend that my arms are my warp. And we get the tension on that warp, you know, we test that tension, we get it exactly how we want it. And then on any loom, when you step on a treadle, the warp is tensioned more because it's moving. On a jack loom, only one portion is moving. On this David, one portion is moving down like this, so that's more the action. But on typical jack looms, they're like this, they might be slightly lower, and then they come up. We have more tension on the warp, and that makes it harder to treadle. That takes a little more effort because of that. And so the other contributing factor to the ease of treadling on the spring loom is the fact that the breast beam actually does this. So this is my warp. I step on a treadle, both parts move, but look at my body. My body also rocks forward ever so slightly. So tension, or warp flat, warp open, and my body moves ever so slightly. It's so minuscule, but that little bit of extra makes sure that the tension on the warp, whether the shed is open or closed, is always the same. And that makes treadling even easier. Let's see that in action. So I'm going to step on a treadle, and if you walk right here, you're going to see it moving. It's ever so slight, but it is moving, and that's what's making it even easier to treadle. So that's what your floating breast beam does. And you control the tension on it down at the bottom by how many holes you have on the Texsolve where you attach it to the screw. But that's all in the manual, and you don't ever make those decisions until you get a warp on and see how you want it to be. The other cool thing about that, before I actually sit and weave, is that when you advance your warp, it means that when you take the tension off your warp, these arms swing in, but then you ratchet forward until they're straight up again. So that's why I think the spring loom is the easiest loom to treadle. Well, I just know from working on lots of other looms that it is the easiest loom to treadle. Anyway, that explains why. That and the parallel countermarch system and all of those shafts and lambs working on stainless steel ball bearings makes it super slick. So I think what I'm going to do now is just weave on it. I'm just going to weave for a bit, and you can see the whole thing in action. And you can hear it. You can see that giant shed. So easy to treadle. I could weave at this loom all day long. It's as noisy as she gets. Got a long weaving distance in the front before you have to advance your warp. I'm going to weave just a tiny bit more, and we're going to advance, and I'm going to show you how you can make sure that the tension is exactly the same after you have advanced your warp as it was before. And that's by looking at our little legs. Our floating breast beam legs will tell us. Throw, beat, change, beat it back. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to advance my warp. I'm sliding over here. I'm going to lift up on my brake handle, and I'm going to make sure that this floating arm is perpendicular to the treadle board, and that will mean that my warp is exactly the same tension as it was before. So there you can see when you take tons of tension off, you can see that the arm goes in, right, like that. And now I'm going to ratchet forward and watch the base of this as it comes, and now it's perfectly straight up and down again. And I know that my tension is exactly the same as it was before I advanced. So that's it. Everything you need to know to help make a decision between the spring loom and the David loom. They're both wonderful looms. They're just different. They move differently. The David is a sinking shed loom. It has a simpler tie-up. The spring is a parallel counter marsh loom. It has a more complex tie-up. It has the simplest and easiest treadling, I believe, of all looms, and it can go to 12 shafts. So now you can make a decision. You'll be happy with either one. They're both wonderful looms to work on. We have both types of looms in the studio, and you know, we use them all. We love them all. We love Louet looms.